Hi, hello. I'm your host, Chloe. Today, I will be talking about The Hunger Games, written by Suzanne Collins. As always, the full-length episodes such as this one include spoilers. There will be spoilers for both this book and the previous book that I covered, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. If you would like to listen to a spoiler-free mini episode on this book, simply click episode 5A, The Hunger Games. If you haven't listened to my full-length episode on Ballad, simply click episode 4B, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. In this episode, I will be discussing allegorical elements, connections and comparisons to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Katniss and Peeta's relationship, and moments worth mentioning. Let's talk about lit. To kick off this episode, I want to talk about the allegorical elements of The Hunger Games. To make sure that we're all on the same page, let's briefly discuss what an allegory is. The definition of allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. Thanks, Google. Allegories typically feature real-life people, but this isn't necessarily a requirement. According to masterclass.com, there are 3 types of allegories. Biblical, like the Chronicles of Narnia, classical, like Dante's Inferno or Plato's Allegory of the Cave, both of which I read my sophomore year of college, and modern, like The Hunger Games. The purpose of writing an allegory is to use your story as a vehicle for hidden commentary about humanity or society. Think of it like this. You are wearing a mask, let's say. Whatever is on the mask is the surface level of the story. That's what people can see just by looking at you. What's behind the mask, so if you took the mask off, your face is the allegory. What people can't see just by looking at you. They have to use context clues in order to figure out what's going on below, or in this case behind, the surface. I hope that makes sense. So, what is The Hunger Games trying to tell us? Remember, we aren't just talking about what's on the surface, what's obvious. Like many of my other segments, I could ramble on for hours if no one stopped me, but to spare you, you're welcome, I'm only going to share 3 elements that I have found and what my thoughts are on each. When I go to Google and type in define insurgent to the search box, this is the definition that comes up. Quote, a rebel or revolutionary, unquote. The synonyms for insurgent include 6 variations of terrorist, anarchist, and traitor. When I type define rebel into the search box, there are 2 definitions for the noun. First, quote, a person who rises in opposition or armed resistance against an established government or ruler, unquote. Synonyms, traitor, terrorist, mutineer. Second, quote, a person who resists authority, control, or convention, unquote. Synonyms, heretic and iconoclast. I bring this up because the definitions of these terms are pretty straightforward, but the connotations associated with them are derogatory and imply an inherent wickedness to anyone who fits the description. Why then do we romanticize rebellion in our media? Why do we have countless heroic tales of vigilantes and rebels where we root for them to win, to be successful? Why do we spend time and money creating and consuming media that embodies something our society has bred us to fear and hate? Therein lies the irony. We enjoy watching or reading about rebels, but the moment the line crosses from fiction to reality, opposition is villainized. For an example from the book, consider the Berries. The Capitol citizens watching lost their minds at the idea of the star-crossed lovers who would rather both die than lose the other. They ate it up because it was entertaining to them. When the stunt works and both Katniss and Peeta are allowed to exit the arena, the tables turn. Suddenly, it isn't about the best way to entertain the viewers. Suddenly, it's about defying the game makers and the Capitol. That act of rebellion must not go unpunished. To extend the previous point, let's talk about violence. Violence is something that is condemned in society, yet it is romanticized and glorified in all forms of media: TV, film, games, and books. While some violence is a reflection of true events, most violence in media is fabricated and often hyperbolized for our entertainment. A century ago, such content was viewed as disgusting, corruptive, and wrong. Today, it's a staple of most genres. Where does this evolution stop? There are still some boundaries intact, but will they remain? One of those boundaries is that children are off limits. Mostly. But what if they weren't? What if they were intentionally forced into violent situations in a gross perversion of society's eroded standards? What if it was no longer a performance or a story, but real life? What if this kind of violence became an anticipated, celebrated part of society, so much so that the very spots where children were slaughtered are preserved for giddy reenactments by the wealthy? Page 144. Where the journey of tributes from reaping to arena are broadcast and saved to watch again later. And I'm not just talking about the Hunger Games in the context of Panem here. I'm talking about the book itself. We gawk at the corrupt capital and rally beside Katniss when she speaks of the injustice the districts are subjected to. Yet we also read the book in its entirety, consumed with the story, wondering who the careers will kill, if Katniss will be able to find Peeta, if they will confess their love, and we are in similar shoes as those in the capital. I can't help but wonder if it was Colin's intention to make us feel this way in order to reevaluate our experience and perspective. That is a nice segue into the final allegorical element: ignorance versus self-awareness. When I say capital citizens, what do you think of? I think of unnatural appearances and overly saturated colors, warped voices, life in excess, food, clothes, luxury. I think of people who not only stomach the televised slaughter of children, but people who revel in it. I think of Effie, with poised hands and careful words. Effie, who is simultaneously ignorant of her privilege and grounded in the severity of the circumstances. She criticizes the table manners of the previous year's tributes on page 44, oblivious to the fact that the children in District 12 are so familiar with starvation that they had never been in the presence of so much food at one time. She expects them to have the same manners as those in the capital, despite the glaring difference in culture and socioeconomic status, and she views them as, quote, savages, page 44, because they do not. Savage is an interesting word choice because of its context with not only the interaction between colonists, patriots, Americans, and indigenous peoples, but with numerous other foreign nations as well. We have in the past and still today labeled cultures that we do not understand as savage or a number of other derogatory descriptors because they are different from our own. It's much easier to judge someone than it is to take the time to examine your privilege and educate yourself about the differences between you. It's also much easier to fear or distrust people who are different from you when you are ignorant than when you are informed. This could play into the government's goal of keeping the people divided. There is tension and uneasiness between the districts because communication and travel is practically non-existent. There is hatred directed at the capital from the districts because of the disparity in wealth and resources. And there is disgust directed at the districts from the capital because of the impoverished conditions in which they live and the labor that they provide. It is much easier to prevent a rebellion if the people are too busy directing their anger at each other that they pay little attention to the government. Sound familiar? I think of Katniss's prep team, who are so obsessed with beauty standards that they mutilate their bodies. They are well-intentioned, but like Effie, ignorant of their privilege. When they recount the events of the games after its conclusion, on page 354, quote, "Everything is about them, not the dying boys and girls in the arena." They place themselves at the center of the games, focusing on their personal feelings and experiences rather than the feelings and experiences of those who are directly affected by the events of the games. They invalidate the lives of those who are suffering and dying. It's not surprising that the same people who force children to murder each other on live TV are the same people who believe that they are more impacted by their perception of events than those who literally lose their lives. Kind of like all of those people who complain that safety recommendations and mandates during a global pandemic strip them of their rights and ruin their lives while hundreds of thousands of people die. Cinna, by contrast, is self-aware. He has a perspective that extends past the Capitol. On page 65, he says to Katniss, quote, "How despicable we must seem to you." He not only acknowledges the disparity between the districts and the Capitol, but he recognizes that it is wrong, that it is worthy of disgust. He still maintains immense privilege in comparison to Katniss, but he uses his privilege to try and help those who are oppressed. It's for this reason, I believe, that he asked to be a stylist for District 12, page 64. While he does not address the problems of the system directly, he engages in small acts of rebellion with deliberate intentions. Ultimately, though, he still benefits from the systems that he rebels against. All of these examples are a reflection of our society. There are people who believe that the rest of the population should live their lives the exact same way as they do, oblivious to factors that work to their own benefit and favor. There are others who are oblivious to the struggles of other people, those who never have to consider what the lives of others may be like because they are protected by their privilege. On the other side of the spectrum are people who are aware of their privileges, those with wealth and status who view oppressive systems as acceptable because they are not personally affected by them, and lives as expendable because they will never have to sacrifice their own. The very people who turn a blind eye to injustice because they do not want to get involved, be political, or take the time to evaluate their privileges and perspectives. There are others still who wish to use their privilege that they possess, either through birth or social mobility, to help those that they perceive to be as less fortunate or oppressed. Before I get started on this next segment, this will be your final spoiler warning regarding the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. With that out of the way, you should remember that I said I was going to use ballad as a frame of reference as we move forward through the rest of the series chronologically. While I was taking notes during my read-through of The Hunger Games, I jotted down some questions and observations that related to what was established in ballad. This is where some of the minor inconsistencies in plot or canon emerge. Within the first chapter, I made several observations as we were given a brief tour of District 12. The Hob, the black market where Katniss and Gale sell their game and gathered goods, seems to be an evolution of the warehouse where the Covey would sing and play their music. The meadow and the lake that appear in Ballad are also in this book, and I assume that based on the overlapping descriptions, the Covey lived in what is now the modern-day Seam. There is even a male mayor with a daughter around the same age as the protagonist. Mayor Undersea buys illegally gathered strawberries from Katniss and doesn't seem to have much taste for sending his district's children to the games, vendetta or otherwise. His daughter Madge, though, does have similar protection as Mayfair did in Ballad, as she has the minimum amount of entries in the Reaping. They don't worry that she will be chosen. Madge is also the one who gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin, the titular animal which is a common feature of life in District 12, as well as District 11, as Rue tells us later. Guess Coriolanus didn't shoot 'em all, thankfully. I made note of Snow's contributions that he made while at the academy or university, as mentioned in Ballad. These points are recapped on page 511 of Ballad and are as follows. The district of the victor gets a food reward, the establishment of victor's housing, a cash prize for the victor, and he also contributed to the idea of sponsorships and gambling. How did these transfer to this book? Let's see. On page 19, Katniss confirms that the district of the victor receives gifts and a food reward. Victor's Village, the luxurious neighborhood that houses the victors in each district, is introduced on page 304. What's interesting, though, is that Katniss says Victor's Village was established, quote, long ago when the games began. This is inconsistent with Ballad, in which no such housing exists. She also says that, quote, of course, in ours only one is occupied. Most of the others have never been lived in at all. This was slightly confusing to me because it implies that victors other than Haymitch have lived in the village. However, we know that District 12 has only ever had 2 victors, one being Haymitch, confirmed on page 19, and the other being Lucy Gray, confirmed in Ballad. At the time that Lucy Gray won the 10th Hunger Games, Victor's Village did not exist. She moves back into the Coveys' small house upon returning home. Ballad ends with her fleeing from Snow into the woods, possibly with a fatal injury. If she somehow survived, would she come back to 12 and move into Victor's Village when it was later built? I doubt so, especially considering Snow would ensure that she be kept from the luxury that she rightfully earned as a victor. I know that this is a minor detail that, doesn't skew the plot or in any meaningful way or anything, but it was an inconsistency that I caught right away. I'm surprised that Collins didn't catch this in her Ballad manuscript. The cash prize for the victor is not mentioned at the end of this book for Katniss and Peeta, but Katniss does think to herself on page 311, I think of Haymitch with all his money. I'm assuming that Katniss and Peeta just have yet to receive their cash reward since the book ends right with their homecoming. Snow's sponsorship system is expanded to include a wider variety of items that can be sent from a wider variety of people. Sponsorship deals have to be made exclusively through the mentor, as Effie exclaims on page 46, which is the same setup as it was for the 10th Hunger Games. Those in the districts may now sponsor gifts as well, as shown by District 11's gift of bread to Katniss on page 238. The types of gifts have extended to include more than just food and water, medicine from burn ointment to a blood poison cure, and other tools such as body armor can be sent to the tributes. One additional element that ups the stakes is that the cost of gifts go up as the day goes on, as revealed on page 266. This means that as the days go on and needs get greater, it is more costly for gifts to be sent into the arena. Even capital citizens may not be wealthy enough to afford a gift on their own as the days go on. There is a betting system in place, though I'm struggling to find the exact page numbers for it. Don't at me, okay? Capital citizens can place bets on tributes influenced by the scores that they are assigned at the end of training and their performance in the arena. I recall Katniss mentioning at some point towards the end of the book that the bets must be getting serious since there are so few tributes left. The tesserae, which are small blocks of stone, tile, or glass that are used in mosaics, thanks again, Google, that Tigress used for the buttons on Snow's upcycled shirt, make a reappearance. On page 13, Katniss explains the tesserae system. You can opt to add your name more times in exchange for tesserae. Each tessera is worth a meager year's supply of grain and oil for one person. You may do this for each of your family members as well. One of the notes that I jotted down as I finished Ballad was regarding personal items in the arena. I wondered if Snow would later allow tributes to bring a personal item with them into the arena to see if anyone would be as clever as he and Lucy Gray were with the compact. While one token per tribute is allowed, as Madge explains on page 38, it must be examined and approved by a review board before it's sent into the arena, as Cinna explains on page 145. It's ironic that Snow made sure no one could cheat the games in the same way that he did. Who's the rebel again? As far as the actual process of the games go, a lot has changed in the 64 years between the 10th Hunger Games and the 74th Hunger Games. Since I've already discussed a few points about the games in the previous segment as well as this one, I'm not going to rehash the entire thing. Instead, I'm just going to hit a few spots that stuck out to me. The arena. In Ballad, the arena was a dilapidated coliseum that was left over from pre-war Panem. The arena was static in design and was used for at least the first 10 games. It's unclear when exactly the game makers began erecting a new arena for each game. On page 18, Katniss gives a brief explanation of the games. On the arena, she says, "The 24 tributes will be imprisoned in a vast outdoor arena that could hold anything from a burning desert to a frozen wasteland." I'm assuming the game makers got bored with the tributes being able to avoid cameras in the tunnels of the Capitol arena, so forcing them to remain outside allows for full media coverage and exposure to the elements. I do think it's odd that there were no specifications as to the size of the arena and how it's enclosed. We do get some of these descriptions in Catching Fire, but they're absent from this book. You would think the smaller the arena, the more concentrated the action would be, since the tributes would be so close together. But I guess they don't want the games to be over too soon, since they'd have to wait an entire year for the next bloodbath to begin. The train. In Ballad, Snow is the only person to greet the tribute train other than the peacekeepers who are there to escort the tributes to the zoo. The train is a cargo train with no windows, and the tributes come out in chains. This is drastically different from the train journey and reception in this book. Katniss is in awe at the sight of the vessel awaiting them, describing it on page 42. The tribute train is fancier than even the room in the Justice Building. We are each given our own chambers that have a bedroom, a dressing area, and a private bathroom with hot and cold running water. Their private accommodations alone far surpass the cramped, dark cars that the tributes were in during at least the first 10 games. On page 59, as their train arrives in the Capitol, quote, "The people begin to point at us eagerly as they recognize a tribute train rolling into the city. It has become an exciting affair, meeting the trains carrying tributes as they enter the city, the first of many spectacles to be seen." Accommodations. In Ballad, the tributes were kept in the monkey cage at the zoo. There was no separation between them, no beds or bathroom, and no food for the first few days. This is also drastically different from the accommodations that the tributes receive in this book. The tributes are housed in the training center, with each district having its own floor, as stated on page 73. Within each floor, there are several rooms, including a dining room and personal quarters for each member of the team. On page 75, Katniss describes her room. "My quarters are larger than our entire house back home. They are plush like the train car, but also have so many automatic gadgets that I'm sure I won't have time to press all the buttons." Then, further down the page, she goes on. "I program the closet for an outfit to my taste. The windows zoom in and out on parts of the city at my command. You need only whisper a type of food from a gigantic menu into a mouthpiece, and it appears, hot and steamy, before you in less than a minute." These accommodations are not only much more humane and dignified than the cage at the zoo, but they are created in luxury. These are the changes that have stumped me. Why would the Capitol funnel resources into ensuring the tributes are comfortable before sending them in for slaughter? Sure, you can argue that fatter prey make for a fuller feast. You could also argue that the Capitol is presently in a state of such excess that it's like a drop in the ocean to give the tribute some scraps. It just doesn't sit right with me. Snow didn't view those from the districts as human when he was a young man, and clearly his rise to power is not due to a change of heart. Why, then, would he see to such changes? I think it's the Capitol's final chance to pour salt in the wound, to show that the district labor produces not only what's needed, but also an excess that could easily care for all of Panem, but it doesn't. The districts live to serve the Capitol, not each other. Or perhaps it is something much more sinister. Play our game, and if you win, this will be your life. You want that, don't you? A preface. Allow me to make myself clear. Peeta and Katniss will always be my OTP, one true pairing for those of you who are either too young or too new to this genre to know the slang. I don't know if that's what the kids are saying nowadays, but that's what we're gonna go with. Okay. I know I'm cheating because I've read the trilogy before, but I cannot let any of you think for a second that I ship Gale and Katniss, because I don't. I do, however, feel like I'm 13 again, sitting in my room on my iPod Touch, scrolling through fandom accounts on Instagram. Do not at me. Okay. Now that the memory of raging teenage hormones has left me, I can continue. This will be a segment that I will cover in the next 2 episodes as well, so we can check back in as their relationship evolves. Buckle up. This is going to be a long ride. Let's start with Katniss's unresolved trauma and perspective on love. Katniss's father was killed in a mine explosion, as revealed on page 23. The sudden and unexpected loss of their father sent their mother into a depressive spiral, as Katniss recalls on page 27. I suppose now that my mother was locked in some dark world of sadness, but at the time, all I knew was that I had lost not only a father, but a mother as well. Katniss shared a special relationship with her father. He was the man who taught her how to use a bow, whose song made even the mockingjays fall silent. When he died, she had no time to process her grief because her mother became absent. She had to become the head of the family, page 27, if they had any chance of survival. This abandonment, page 35, made Katniss resent her mother and shift all focus to staying alive and keeping them out of the community home, page 27. Turning away from her parental relationships, there's Prim. Prim, who is the only person in the world I'm certain I love, she thinks to herself on page 10. Prim is the only person in her life who she does not have to rely on for survival. Instead, she is the one who is relied on. She chooses to have an unconditional and unwavering love for Prim because she is her little sister, the gentle child who would not survive without her big sister's support. Katniss doesn't choose to love her out of need. She chooses to love her because she wants to. Let's look at the only other prominent figure in her life, pre-games. Gale. On page 10, she says that there's never been anything romantic between Gale and me. She doesn't, arguably, feel romantic love towards him. She views him as, quote, a good hunting partner. Her relationship with Gale is one formed out of survival. They could individually hunt and gather with success, but it is their teamwork that provides enough food for both of their families to eat and spoils for trading. Their relationship is formed out of a mutual need to survive, for not only themselves, but for their families. Sure, they're friends. Sure, they clearly care about each other, but their bond has been formed through their need to stay alive. Would they have chosen to be friends under different circumstances? Katniss even supports my theory on page 112 after the tributes receive their training scores. She thinks to herself, I can't help comparing what I have with Gale to what I'm pretending to have with Peeta. How I never question Gale's motives while I do nothing but doubt the latter's. It's not a fair comparison, really. Gale and I were thrown together by a mutual need to survive. Peeta and I know the other's survival means our own death. How do you sidestep that? How does this change when they are no longer competing for one spot? I think that there is a noticeable shift in dynamics after the announcement of the rule change on page 244. Quote, the news sinks in. 2 tributes can win this year if they're from the same district. Both can live. Both of us can live. Before I can stop myself, I call out Peeta's name. This is not a move that she planned out to pander to the audience. This is her genuine reaction. Now that one of them winning does not mean the other dying, she views the situation much differently. I don't think that she ever truly wanted him dead. She just didn't want him to survive at the cost of her life. Now that two tributes can win, she wants them both to live. She begins to reevaluate their relationship on page 247. It just makes sense to protect each other. And in my case, being one of the star-crossed lovers from District 12, it's an absolute requirement if I want any more help from sympathetic sponsors. The star-crossed lovers. PETA must have been playing that angle all along. Why else would the game makers have made this unprecedented change in the rules? Her relationship with PETA is now, at this moment, a direct parallel to her relationship with Gale. With Gale, the two of them keep each other alive by hunting together and splitting all spoils. As I said earlier, they can individually do these tasks, but their partnership is what ensures that they both have enough. With PETA, the two of them have been keeping each other alive through their star-crossed lovers bit. While it is possible that one of them could win on their own, it's their partnership that ensures they both have the necessary food, medicine, and protection to survive. This is another in a line of relationships that are formed out of the need for survival, not necessarily choice. That does not mean, however, that there were no authentic feelings between them. She continues on the bottom of page 247, top of 248. Whatever he's done in the arena, he must have the audience convinced it was to keep me alive. Shaking his head to keep me from running to the cornucopia, fighting Cato to let me escape, even hooking up with the careers must have been a move to protect me. PETA, it turns out, has never been a danger to me. Let me ask you this. Would you continuously risk your life for someone you did not care about? Someone whose death would give you a greater chance at living? Would you put yourself in the lion's den to try and outsmart the predator, knowing that your plan could backfire? I don't think I would. You can't argue that PETA has done this to get sponsor gifts because on page 259, he reveals that he has received nothing up to the point of them being reunited at the stream. If he isn't getting any reward out of it and he may die in the process, why does he do it? I personally believe wholly and completely that it's because he's in love with her. That is the only explanation that makes sense to me. Before they enter the arena, his actions are strategic and designed to put Katniss forward. He tells Haymitch about her skills on page 89, telling her not to underrate herself. He doesn't take his own advice, constantly underrating himself to make her seem more capable. The stunt in the interview to tell Panem that he has a crush on her was his idea, expanded upon by Haymitch, page 135. What was his motivation? Was it his honest feelings? Was it driven by his hope to make Katniss desirable to the Capitol? I think it was a mixture. PETA is very clever, so I know that nothing he does is arbitrary. I don't believe that this makes him ingenuine, though. When the duo later has time together in the cave, after the feast, Katniss asks PETA when he started having a crush on her. He recounts the moment he knew on page 300. Oh, let's see. I guess it was the first day of school. We were 5. You had on a red plaid dress and your hair, it was in 2 braids instead of 1. He goes on to describe that day, telling her that he knew he was a goner the moment he heard her sing. Why would he lie about this or make it up? Katniss remembers the dress, the song, and the other details that he mentions. She shares my conclusion. His feelings for her beginning on that day explain his motive to take a beating to give her bread. On page 301, she considers this. So, if those details are true, could it all be true? My answer? Yes. I think that Katniss grows to love PETA, but I don't believe that she is in love with him yet. I think that this is a result of several factors. 1, she has unresolved childhood trauma that has affected her understanding of love. 2, all of her relationships, except for her relationship with Prem, have not been out of choice. She doesn't know what it's like to choose to love someone. 3. On page 261, she acknowledges that she has never been in love before, which reinforces that she has not experienced romantic love and doesn't know what it's like to choose to love someone romantically. Then, when you consider the circumstances, it's no wonder that she's overwhelmed and confused about her feelings. She is 16 years old, and they are in an arena fighting for their very lives. Love would be the last thing on her mind if it was not, coincidentally, what was keeping her alive. All of that being said, I think that Katniss does love him. Not at first, but gradually. Once she realizes that he has only been trying to help her, not hurt her, her view of him changes. She sees him as her partner, as her connection to home, as her lifeline. She risks her life to go to the feast, not just because the Capitol would crucify her if she didn't, but because she knew it was Peeta's only chance of survival. Once she wakes up from her return, the two of them have a chance to talk. As they recap her stunt at the feast, Peeta reveals another side of himself. Quote, "No! Just don't, Katniss." His grip tightens, hurting my hand, and there's real anger in his voice. "Don't die for me. You won't be doing me any favors, all right?" This intensity prompts a reaction from her. While she begins with the intention of getting food, it becomes something else when the line between her story and reality blur. I want to read this passage beginning on page 297. "Maybe I did it for myself, Peeta. Did you ever think of that? Maybe you aren't the only one who worries about what it would be like if I fumble. I'm not as smooth with words as Peeta. And while I was talking, the idea of actually losing Peeta hit me again, and I realized how much I don't want him to die. And it's not about the sponsors, and it's not about what will happen back home, and it's not just that I don't want to be alone. It's him. I do not want to lose the boy with the bread." "If what, Katniss?" he says softly. I wish I could pull the shutters closed, blocking out this moment from the prying eyes of Panem. Even if it means losing food. Whatever I'm feeling, it's no one's business but mine. This passage is pivotal, and it is the moment I knew that she loved him. She doesn't want to lose the boy who saved the life of her and her family by giving them bread, the boy who watched her sing in awe, the boy who noticed that she always shoots squirrels in the eyes, the boy who told Panem that he had feelings for her, the boy who risked his life for her. Nothing else matters to her in that moment. They are alive and they are together. Now, let's address the resolution of the book. On page 372, without any cameras or prying eyes watching them, they have the freedom to talk openly for the first time. Katniss reveals to Peeta that the game makers did not like the rebellious act of presenting Nightlock, and they are looking for a way to punish them. Because of this, Haymitch had been giving her advice on how to conduct herself in front of the cameras in order to avoid causing any further trouble. Peeta is shocked. He doesn't know why Haymitch would be telling her what to do, unless, quote, "It was all for the games," Peeta says. "How you acted?" "Not all of it," I say, tightly holding on to my flowers. "Then how much?" "No, forget that. I guess the real question is what's going to be left when we get home," he says. "I don't know. The closer we get to District 12, the more confused I get," I say. He waits for further explanation, but none's forthcoming. "Well, let me know when you work it out," he says, and the pain in his voice is palpable. There are two things that I want to point out here. First, Katniss says that not all of what she did was for the cameras and the Capitol. This not only supports my theory that she loves him, but this suggests that she has developed romantic feelings towards him, that there were genuine moments shared between them. Second, she says that she's more confused the closer they get to home. I think that this is because, as she says herself, the further that she gets away from the capital, the more that she can breathe. The more that she has the freedom to think without focusing on surviving, the more that she can talk without fearing that someone is listening to her. Now that she has this space, she is able to begin to process all of the trauma that she just endured. For the first time, she is able to begin to think about things other than hunting and trading, like relationships. But we must understand that this is all brand new to Katniss. She doesn't have a role model for processing trauma and emotions in a healthy way, and she doesn't know how to do so herself. She's never been in a romantic relationship before or even had the luxury of thinking about one. She has come out of the arena having witnessed horrors and committed horrors that no child should ever have to even think about. This will take time. Peeta's feelings are completely valid in this situation, and his reaction is justified. At the same time, so is Katniss's. While the hopeless romantic in me wants them to fall completely in love in this moment, I am so thankful that Collins ended the book this way. She values the complexity of Katniss's character enough to give her the time and space that she deserves. Collins chose to respect the female protagonist and not minimize her journey to just being one half of a relationship. With this ending, Collins shows the teenage girls who are reading this story that they are more than who they do or do not love, that they do not have to be in a relationship when they are not ready or are unsure, that their story is worth reading even if it isn't about love. That is powerful. Now, I want to avoid spending my podcast comparing and contrasting books and their film counterparts. That being said, I will briefly discuss such things when I have both read the book and seen the movie and found a discrepancy that I want to discuss. This segment is about moments from the book that were fleeting but memorable. It just so happens that one was excluded from the movie entirely, while the other was drastically changed. That being said, I know a lot of people say that books are better than their film adaptations. While that is definitely true for this book, I will say that such a comparison isn't entirely fair. Film and print are two completely different forms of media. Film relies on aesthetics and visuals, scores and sound effects, costumes and sets, and actors to bring the story to life. Films do all the work for you. Print, on the other hand, shifts a majority of the work to the reader. There may be sparse or detailed descriptions, all brought to life only in the reader's mind. Thousands of people can read the same book but have entirely different experiences based on what they imagined when they read it. That's part of the magic of books. They offer experiences that are entirely unique from reader to reader. There are moments that unfortunately do not appear on screen, either for lack of open runtime or for lack of available resources for rendering. There are two instances of this in the film adaptation of The Hunger Games, two moments that have been minimized or overlooked entirely. The first is Clove's death at the feast. This moment is raw and revealing, and it breaks my heart. The scene starts on page 286 when Thresh appears and rips Clove off of Katniss's chest. The second that the power has shifted from her to Thresh, Clove's facade of sadism vanishes. She scrambles away from him, quote, like a frantic insect, page 287, before she begins screaming Cato's name. Thresh brings a rock against her skull, fracturing it. As Katniss and Thresh share a tense exchange, Cato calls out for his ally on page 288. Clove! Cato's voice is much nearer now. I can tell by the pain in it that he sees her on the ground. Thresh and Katniss split off and flee the scene. Katniss hesitates for a moment on page 289 and turns back. Quote, Cato kneels beside Clove, spear in hand, begging her to stay with him. In a moment, he will realize it's futile. She can't be saved. Let's break this down. We don't know much personal information about Cato or Clove, other than that they are the District 2 tributes and members of the Career Pact. On page 45, as Katniss and Peeta watch the other reapings, we are given this snippet. We examine the faces of the kids who will be our competition. A few stand out in my mind. A monstrous boy who lunges forward to volunteer from District 2. Now, it has been previously established that tributes from District 1, 2, and 4 commonly volunteer. Consider this, though. If all reapings are uniform and done in the same way as District 12's, the name of the female tribute would be called first. This means that Clove's name was drawn first, since it does not clarify and say that she volunteered as well. Did Cato, then, volunteer solely for the conditioned belief of glory, or to join Clove in the games? When the moment came and she was faced with death, Clove called out for Cato. He tried to save her, and when he arrived too late, he was clearly devastated, as indicated by him begging her to stay with him. In spite of the circumstances, he wanted her to live. Was it just because he didn't want to be alone, or because he wanted the glory of being the first pair of victors? Maybe. But a boy who callously kills others without blinking an eye would not fall to the ground in pain and anguish for just another obstacle between him and winning. That brings me to something else I want to mention. The fear and vulnerability of this moment reminded both me and Katniss that the other tributes are children too. They are all just kids forced into killing by the Capitol. Cato and Clove were raised in a district that is favored by the Capitol, favor that would be lost if they did not play their games. I truly feel that Cato and Clove were doing what they were bred to believe. If they played their part and gave the Capitol a good show, as Clove says herself on 285, they would be spared, rewarded even. That there was a disconnect between ending someone else's life and facing the end of their own. Ultimately, they were both just pawns, game pieces to be discarded once they outlived their usefulness to the Capitol. They were still just kids, desperately fighting to survive. The second moment, or a span of several hours rather, that I want to discuss focuses on the mutts. As I've probably said like 50 times by now, it's been a decade since I read this book. While I knew I could recall all of the important events, the meat of it, I didn't realize how many of the nuances I had forgotten. As I approached the end of the games and the mortifying introduction of the mutts, I felt a sense of dread fall over me. I knew there was something fundamentally wrong with the mutts, besides the fact that they are genetically engineered monstrosities meant to maim and murder children, but I wasn't sure quite what. No, it couldn't be what I thought I remembered it to be, right? Okay. Chapter 25, which starts on page 331, is where this nightmare fuel claws its way to the surface from the scorching black pits of hell, and no, I'm not exaggerating. Katniss and Peeta come face to face with something more terrifying than Cato, wolf-like mutts with 4-inch claws. After narrowly escaping the mutts by scaling the cornucopia, Katniss is able to get a better look at this new threat. On page 332, she observes, "The mutts are beginning to assemble. As they join together, they raise up again to stand easily on their back legs, giving them an eerily human quality." On the next page, as one mutt in particular attempts to join them, the realization dawns on Katniss. For a moment it hangs there, and in that moment I realize what else unsettled me about the mutts. The green eyes glowering at me, unlike any dog or wolf, any canine I've ever seen. They are unmistakably human. The mutt she has locked eyes with is Glimmer. Katniss understandably is horrified, screams and fires an arrow into its throat. She takes in the other mutts and quickly recognizes Foxface, the boy from District 9, and Rue. Peeta asks on page 334, "What did they do to them? You don't think those could be their real eyes?" This propels Katniss into a frenzy, her thoughts running through the possibility that the tribute's brains could have also been transplanted into the mutts. A scuffle with Cato ensues, which ends with them catapulting him over the side to the horrors below. There are two twisted and gut-wrenching implications of this scene. First, the game makers have no qualms with mutilating the corpses of dead children to create lab monstrosities meant to kill the remaining child tributes. The mere thought that after collecting the bodies of the deceased, the game makers pulled their eyes from their sockets and implanted them into the skulls of mutts. The fact that Katniss seriously considered that the brains of the deceased may also be in the mutts makes me believe that this is not something below the game makers. Those in the Capitol are truly willing to do anything for their own sick enjoyment. These creatures are clearly intelligent, which could be attributed to advanced technology and engineering, but it could also be due to human-like intelligence. Regardless of the eyes and brains, the mutts were each strategically designed to be a counterpart to one of the dead. Seeing those you have killed or lost in such a perverted state would elicit a strong emotional response that alone could be debilitating. Their mere presence is chilling, a reminder that you cannot escape even the dead. Combine this with their deadly strength and abilities, you have one hell of a finale. This brings me to the second implication. A cannon does not follow shortly after Cato plummets to the ground. Instead, he is mauled and toyed with for hours by the mutts. Because this is the climax of the Hunger Games, and the audience expects a show. Katniss thinks on page 337. As the hours pass and the boy's screams become less human, Katniss and Peeta agree to end his misery. On page 340, Katniss finds, quote, "the raw hunk of meat that used to be my enemy," and fires a final arrow. Just like Clove, Cato was merely a piece in the Capitol's game. His life was worth no more than someone from an outlying district, despite his district's dedication to pleasing the Capitol. His death was agonizingly slow, so those with wealth and power could fawn over the gore in the comfort of their own homes. The Capitol does not value the life of anyone outside of its walls, especially not the lives of innocent children. Well, there you have it. My thoughts on Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games. Join me next time for episode 6A and 6B, Catching Fire. Let's talk about lit. Thanks for listening.